Imagine walking through a dense Ice Age forest at dusk. The wind is sharp, the shadows long, and every sound feels like a predator creeping closer. Suddenly, you spot glowing eyes in the dark, but they don't belong to a saber-tooth or a wolf. They belong to another kind of human. Stockier than you. Stronger than you. More brutal than the Neanderthals you've heard whispers about. You realize, with a shiver, you are not the only human species here, and survival may mean facing an ancient rival far deadlier than anything you imagined. When we think of human history, it's tempting to picture a straight line, one species, Homo sapiens, gradually rising and dominating the Earth. But the truth is far more unsettling. For most of our early existence, we weren't alone. The Earth was crowded with other kinds of humans, and some of them were stronger, tougher, and more terrifying than us. Imagine stepping back into the Ice Age, tens of thousands of years ago. You wouldn't just find mammoths, saber-toothed cats, and towering predators lurking in the wild. You'd also stumble across other human species, rivals who looked familiar, yet different enough to remind you that survival wasn't guaranteed. The most famous of these rivals were the Neanderthals. Stocky, muscular, and perfectly adapted to the freezing climates of Ice Age Europe, they were the ultimate survival machines. For years, people painted them as brutish cavemen, but modern science tells us otherwise. Neanderthals made tools, controlled fire, and even buried their dead with care. They weren't dumb. In fact, they were highly capable, perhaps even more physically suited to survival than we were. Welcome to Before Flame. Fire. If you enjoyed traveling back in time with me, don't forget to hit like and subscribe so you never miss the next journey into our ancient past. But Neanderthals weren't the only ones. In the mountains of Asia, there were Denisovans, a mysterious group we know mostly through DNA and a handful of fossil fragments. And then there were others, Homo erectus, who had survived for nearly 2 million years, and the tiny yet cunning Homo floresiensis, nicknamed the hobbits of Indonesia. The world of early humans was not simple. It was a crowded stage, a brutal contest where strength, intelligence, and adaptability meant the difference between life and extinction. And as we'll soon see, one of these rivals may have been far more terrifying than the Neanderthals ever were. For decades, scientists believed the biggest rivals to Homo sapiens were Neanderthals. But recent discoveries have uncovered an even darker mystery, the Denisovans. Unlike Neanderthals, whose bones and tools are scattered across Europe, Denisovans remain a ghostly presence. We don't have complete skeletons or caves filled with their art. What we have instead are fragments, a finger bone, a few teeth, and traces of DNA hidden within the earth. And yet, from these small clues, a terrifying picture begins to emerge. Denisovans weren't just another branch of humanity. They were powerful, cunning, and uniquely adapted to environments that would kill most of us. Imagine standing in the frozen peaks of the Himalayas. Thin air, brutal cold, endless stone. Most humans would struggle to breathe, let alone survive. But Denisovans thrived there. Genetic evidence shows they carried traits that gave them an extraordinary edge in high altitudes, traits still found today in the DNA of Tibetan people. Think about that. A species so well adapted to extreme conditions that, even after vanishing thousands of years ago, their legacy still lingers in our blood. But it wasn't just endurance that made them formidable. Denisovan DNA also hints at immune system advantages, defenses against diseases that would have devastated weaker species. Combine that with their strength, resilience, and intelligence, and you begin to realize why they were such dangerous rivals. The most chilling part? They didn't just compete with us. They mixed with us. Their genetic fingerprints are still inside many modern humans, in Asia, in Oceania, even in parts of Europe. Which means that somewhere in our distant past, Sapiens didn't just fight Denisovans. They lived alongside them, sometimes as enemies, sometimes as mates. Now, picture the meeting of Sapiens and Denisovans in some remote, icy wilderness. Two human species, staring at each other across the firelight. No shared language, no treaties, only instincts. Were they friend or foe? For most encounters, the answer was probably both. Archaeological evidence and DNA studies suggest that some meetings ended violently. Imagine a band of Denisovans defending a river valley, their territory, their lifeline. A group of Sapiens wanders in, exhausted, hungry, desperate. Spears are raised, shouts echo through the trees, and the first clash begins. There were no wars in the way we think of them today, but survival itself was war. For every valley or cave, one group thrived while the other faded. But not every encounter ended in bloodshed. Sometimes, they ended in something far more complicated. Mating. Interbreeding. Evidence shows that not only did Sapiens and Denisovans share DNA, but those unions left lasting marks on our species. In fact, entire populations, like the ancestors of today's Melanesians, carry Denisovan genes in far higher proportions. This means survival wasn't just about wiping out rivals. Sometimes it meant merging with them. And that blurs the line between us and them. If fragments of Denisovan DNA still shape how some of us breathe at high altitudes or resist certain diseases, then are they truly gone? Or are they still here, alive within us? That's the haunting question Denisovans leave behind. They weren't just shadows in the ice. They became part of who we are. But while their genes survived, their culture, their stories, their faces, are lost forever. All that remains are whispers in our blood, and the mystery of how close humanity came to being replaced by something not quite us. Imagine opening your eyes in the freezing dawn of the Ice Age. The world is hostile from the very first breath. Frost clings to your eyelashes, your lungs burn from the cold air, and the vast tundra stretches endlessly, silent except for the distant howl of predators. For Denisovans and other early humans, this wasn't a nightmare, it was daily life. Food was never guaranteed. A failed hunt meant hunger, and hunger meant weakness. And weakness, in this world, was an invitation for death. Predators stalked every shadow, saber-toothed cats, cave lions, packs of wolves. Unlike us today, tucked safely behind walls and screens, early humans faced the raw reality that they were not at the top of the food chain. They were prey just as often as they were hunters. Water wasn't a simple need, either. It was a gamble. Rivers and lakes could be teeming with crocodiles or polluted with parasites that brought slow, agonizing death. To drink was to risk, yet not to drink was to die. Survival was a brutal balancing act, a game where the wrong choice could end an entire bloodline. And then came the climate itself. One week, blistering cold that froze bone marrow. The next, a sudden thaw that flooded caves and swept away shelters. Seasons didn't follow predictable patterns. They shifted violently, crushing the unprepared. For Denisovans, Neanderthals, and Sapiens alike, adaptation wasn't a skill. It was the difference between life and extinction. This fragile existence meant every sunrise was a victory. And yet, against all odds, these early humans endured, not through sheer strength, but through resilience, wit, and the desperate will to see another day. Step outside the safety of a cave, and the world instantly turned into a battlefield. For Denisovans, Neanderthals, and early Sapiens, every sound mattered. The snap of a twig, the rustle of tall grass, it could mean a predator was watching. Saber-toothed cats lurked in ambush, massive hyenas hunted in packs, and giant bears roamed territories humans dared to enter. Facing these beasts with only stone-tipped spears and fire wasn't courage. It was desperation. But predators weren't the only killers. Death came from the invisible as much as from fangs and claws. A minor cut from a sharp rock could fester into infection. Drinking from the wrong stream could introduce parasites that drained strength day by day, until even walking became impossible. Fever, coughs, or stomach pains weren't inconveniences. They were often death sentences. The Denisovans didn't have medicine, healers, or antibiotics. Their bodies either fought back or failed. And then there was hunger, the most relentless enemy of all. Hunting wasn't a guarantee of meat, and when it failed, starvation gnawed at their minds and bodies. Weakness slowed the tribe. Slow tribes lost children. Lost children meant lost future. Survival wasn't individual. It was collective. One person's sickness, one person's mistake, could doom the entire group. The daily gamble of existence created a brutal reality. Only the toughest, smartest, and most adaptable survived long enough to pass on their genes. Denisovans were masters of endurance, yet their world demanded constant vigilance. To live another day meant fighting nature itself, in all its violent, merciless forms. Every sunrise in the Denisovan world was a test of balance. They lived on the razor's edge between life and death, where one small failure could unravel everything. A failed hunt didn't just mean empty bellies. It meant weakness, vulnerability to predators, and conflict within the group. A sudden storm could wash away a shelter. A sickness could spread through the tribe like wildfire. Survival wasn't steady, it was fragile and always temporary. The Denisovans adapted by reading the land in ways we can barely comprehend today. They tracked animal migrations, recognized edible plants, and built temporary shelters in the most strategic locations. But even with these skills, they weren't invincible. Their world didn't allow for complacency. A group might thrive one season, only to vanish the next, leaving behind nothing but bones and broken tools. For modern humans, it's easy to romanticize the Stone Age as a time of raw freedom, but for the Denisovans, freedom came at a price. Every choice carried risk. Every mistake could echo for generations. They didn't dominate their world, they negotiated with it, constantly bending, adapting, and struggling just to stay alive. And yet, out of this daily battle emerged resilience. Their survival demanded cooperation, innovation, and relentless endurance. It's this struggle, not comfort, not ease, that forged them into one of the most formidable human species to ever walk the earth. But even the most resilient humans faced a limit. And as time marched forward, Denisovans found themselves not only battling nature's fury but also a new, equally dangerous rival, us. For tens of thousands of years, the Denisovans lived in relative isolation, masters of their icy mountain ranges and dense Asian forests. But isolation doesn't last forever. Across continents, another human species was rising, Homo sapiens. Compared to Denisovans, sapiens were leaner, more adaptable, and armed with an advantage that would prove deadly: larger social networks and more advanced communication. The meeting of these two species wasn't written down in history books, but the evidence is etched into our very DNA. Fossils tell us that Denisovans and modern humans crossed paths. Sometimes those meetings may have been hostile, rival groups clashing over hunting grounds or fresh water. Imagine the tension: one camp of Denisovans perched on a ridge, watching unfamiliar strangers creep into their territory. Spears gripped tighter, muscles tense, survival instincts ignite. The silence before conflict must have been deafening. But not every encounter ended in violence. The truth is more complex. Genetic studies reveal that sapiens and Denisovans interbred multiple times, leaving fragments of Denisovan DNA scattered through the genomes of people today, especially in parts of Asia, Oceania, and even Tibet. These weren't just fleeting encounters, they were unions that shaped the future of humanity. Still, interbreeding alone didn't secure the Denisovan survival. As sapiens spread farther and faster, their numbers grew. They hunted in coordinated groups, developed more efficient weapons, and shared knowledge across vast distances. Denisovans, despite their resilience, faced a rival that wasn't just another predator. It was a mirror of themselves, only faster, more connected, and more relentless. The collision of these worlds was inevitable. And for the Denisovans, every meeting with sapiens brought a question: fight, join, or vanish. The disappearance of the Denisovans wasn't marked by a single great battle or catastrophic event. Instead, it was a slow fade, a steady erosion of their world as Homo sapiens spread like wildfire across continents. Piece by piece, the Denisovan stronghold shrank, not from weakness, but from relentless pressure. Imagine being part of a small Denisovan band, watching as sapiens multiplied and spread, their networks reaching farther than the eye could see. For Denisovans, survival depended on smaller groups, tightly bound by kinship and territory. For sapiens, survival meant scale: dozens of groups linked by shared language, rituals, and trade. This imbalance tilted the odds with every passing generation. Climate shifts made matters worse. The ice advanced and retreated, forests withered, and food grew scarce. When resources dried up, competition sharpened. Sapiens, with their adaptability, found new ways to endure, crafting clothes, building shelters, organizing hunts. Denisovans, though powerful, may have struggled to adapt as quickly to such rapid change. Every harsh winter and every lost hunting ground chipped away at their numbers. And then there was the silent assimilation. Interbreeding with sapiens meant that Denisovan blood didn't vanish entirely. Instead, it was absorbed, woven into the genetic fabric of future generations. In one sense, the Denisovans didn't truly go extinct, they became part of us. But for their unique identity, their culture, their way of life, the end was irreversible. By the time Denisovans faded into the shadows of history, their presence lingered only in whispers, bones buried deep in caves, tools left behind in rock shelters, and the DNA hidden inside us. They didn't leave a written legacy, but they left a biological one, carved into our very cells. The Denisovans may have disappeared from the Earth's surface, but their story didn't end with their last breath. Their true legacy lives on inside us, hidden in strands of DNA that still shape human survival today. Modern genetic research reveals astonishing clues. Populations in parts of Asia and Oceania carry up to 5% Denisovan DNA. These aren't meaningless fragments. Some of these genes are linked to immunity, resistance to diseases, and even the ability to thrive in extreme environments. For example, Tibetan populations inherited a Denisovan gene that allows them to breathe and function at high altitudes where oxygen is dangerously thin. Without this gift, life on the roof of the world might never have been possible. But the Denisovans gave us more than biology. Their story forces us to rethink what it means to be human. For centuries, Sapiens saw themselves as a lone, chosen species, the inevitable rulers of the Earth. Yet the bones, tools, and genes tell a different tale. We weren't alone. We weren't inevitable. We survived because of chance, adaptability, and, in part, because of them. It's haunting to imagine the Denisovans, once fierce and thriving, now reduced to ghostly traces inside our blood. They may have outlasted harsh climates and terrifying predators, but in the end, they could not outlast us. Their memory lingers in the shadows of history, reminding us that dominance is fragile, and survival always comes at a cost. The Denisovans were not just rivals. They were ancestors, allies, and perhaps even the silent architects of some of our strengths. Their voices are gone, but their essence remains, carried forward by every breath we take. So here's the chilling question. If another human species walked beside us today, would we embrace them or repeat the past? The story of the Denisovans is more than just an archaeological mystery. It's a mirror. Their rise, their power, and their disappearance remind us that even the mightiest species can vanish into history's silence. What remains are fragments, bones in a cave, tools buried in the earth, and DNA flowing quietly through our veins. Their legacy proves something profound. Survival isn't guaranteed. It depends on cooperation, adaptability, and the choices we make when the world tests us. The Denisovans couldn't see their end coming, but we, unlike them, can. If we forget their story, we risk repeating it. So, ask yourself, will humanity learn from the ghosts of those who came before us, or will we, too, one day become just another lost species?